Welcome to the Sensible Socialist Podcast, a podcast for the rational left.
We need to unite and work together if we're all going to get through this. Sounds like socialism to me.
The amount of people I see talking about socialism positively is actually staggering.
Do you think, do you really think that a proletarian revolution is just around the corner in America?
Grab your pitchforks and stab your mayor.
Your hero, Obama.
He's not my hero. I'm not fucking idiot.
If
Bernie Sanders were president, right, and he wanted to bring the same ideas as for socialism into this country, do you think that we would benefit?
Yeah.
But I just told you Venezuela's eating rats.
But I just want people to have health care. I don't want,
Same thing Hugo Chavez.
Oh my god. You people have, worms in your brain, honestly.
Welcome to the Sensible Socialist Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Gustafson, and on this episode, we're going to do something a little bit different than we normally do on the podcast. With me today is Noah Hutton, the writer, director, editor, and score composer for the new speculative fiction film, Lapsis. So Noah, thanks for coming on the podcast and talking about this amazing film.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for having me on to talk about it.
Yeah, so Lapsis, which was released in early February 2021, it was selected to appear at South by Southwest. It's won other awards. The thing that I think is relevant to this podcast and the thing that I really like about it is that this film is basically a political film, a political commentary, set in a world that we all recognize. So it's, something akin to Sorry to Bother You or Sorry We Missed You, a modern political film of a world we can recognize. So it sort of centers around this new form of precarious work, obviously kind of set in a world that we can very much recognize, one where big tech and Wall Street have sort of conspired together to create mega monopolies that make work more insecure, as Alan Greenspan argued we have to do to stay competitive. So in the story, gig workers are laying cable through forests to help connect transistor boxes that increase the speed of information transfer using quantum computing to allow even quicker transfers on Wall Street, as very close to how it was with microtransaction sort of tradings on Wall Street. And so it follows the main character, Ray, who's already a pretty precarious worker, who then, because he's got a sick brother, has to go into this sort of more precarious, dangerous, out in the woods. He's not exactly a hiker. He's sort of obviously not in shape, which I thought was really well done too. But he's forced to work along with a bunch of other people who are doing this without basic protections, without health care, and then also having to compete with automated robots. So, it's sort of we can think Uber and other kinds of precarious work, but also having to compete with automation, already existing automation, which I think is brilliant. And so he meets other cablers, including a character, Anna, who I loved from the first time she opened her mouth. It was I really like this character. But he's basically forced to reckon with the sort of obvious exploitative nature of the work he's doing, and then eventually kind of realizes the importance of coming together with other workers in order to make the situation a little bit more fair and to combat the exploitation that they see. So that's my little synopsis without trying to give anything away. But I want to say, Noah, this film is truly amazing. I enjoyed every minute of it, and I think it's an hour and 40 some minutes long, right? So it's not super short, it's not super long, but to me it just captured my attention the whole time, which is obviously hard to do in this day and age. And so I think it's a piece of art, and I want to congratulate you on doing such a fine job. It was amazing.
I really appreciate that, Kevin. I mean, it's, as you said, it's hard to grab attention these days, especially when people have unlimited possibilities in front of them of what to watch at night. These streaming platforms are just chock full of options. So anyone who chooses to watch our film and makes it through the end, I'm eternally grateful for choosing it to watch it. And I hope more people find it as we can have conversations like this.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the first thing that was a bit confusing and made me want to learn more is why is it called Lapsis? Like, what does that have to do with quantum computing or this cabling, as they call it, right? That's a great kind of and then when you first hear it, you're like, that's what Lapsis is, and then as Lapsis, that kind of word, and that is its own kind of character, and it's very well done in that sense. But I'm curious to just like start at the very beginning and wonder what kind of prompted you to make this movie and sort of write this story? Because I've seen some of the other work that you've done, and there is some documentary work, and so what kind of prompted you to say, oh, I want to write this story about these precarious workers, and kind of go through how this all developed in your mind and how it got to paper and all that?
Yeah, well, I think it comes from a few different places. I'll try to quickly trace the origins of one of them being, I do come from documentaries, like you said, and I had made a couple documentaries about the oil boom in North Dakota. I made 2 feature docs spaced out across like 6 years. And in those films, I was really focused on like the social conditions of small towns and also the Native American reservation out there, how they were dealing with the oil boom. And I guess it's loosely sort of the case out there, much more in focus, I think, in Lapsis, but the fact of like a big technological boom allowing for this rush of industry to an area, and then all sorts of unintended or intended consequences on working people on the ground who either, rush to it as the kind of new like gold rush that is available to them, run away from it and are kind of haunted by it, either through environmental conditions or the change to their landscape. And just seeing that kind of like the 5 or 10 year later trickle effect of a tech boom. People don't think of oil drilling as a tech boom, but fracking, as it began more recently, really was a tech boom, another layer of technology on top of classic oil drilling. So I kind of was interested in looking at that in that perspective as a technological shift that allowed for this new level of extraction and how that affected working people. And I think that like sensibility then was just sort of like has been what I'm interested in. But then, writing a piece of speculative fiction, it's like somehow at some point, I think it has to connect a little deeper to you and your own experience. The docs I made were very observational. They were like fly on the wall, people kind of like weaving a story from interviews. And ultimately it's not really enough to justify a piece of fiction unless you can put some of yourself into it. So I think where this project really came from then was in all those years of working on documentaries and then coming back home and trying to support myself. I was a freelancer. I was an independent contractor. I was selling my labor anywhere I could to make videos for nonprofits or edit a little, industrial video. I did a lot of commercial editing in New York to like make my living for a while. And it was that like lifestyle of going from gig to gig, kind of being on this like treadmill of labor, not having any healthcare through any of that by any means, and like having to figure all that out on my own, buy my own camera gear, get my own like operation going as a freelancer. That kind of started seeding, I think, the feeling of what you described as the cabling and Lapsis, this feeling of work that is an invented form of labor, but yet somehow feels, I think, materially very like what a lot of us experience as freelancers and independent contractors going from gig to gig. That's where cabling, I think, the gestalt of cabling came out of. And, and then the last, I think, element to add to that is that I before all of this, I have more of a science background in that I studied neuroscience as an undergraduate and then got into filmmaking kind of after that. And so I've also done some documentary work about neuroscience, but I definitely am always interested in science and technology. I think I started in my early 20s more interested in it kind of like, wow, science is amazing. Holy cow, like the universe, the brain, oh my God. And I've definitely, like, over the last decade, as I've become more of an aware, like, political subject, I've also, my interest in science and technology has curdled a little bit with those politics, in that I'm now really interested in, like, the promises of technology and science and how it's actually shaken out for working people again 5 or 10 years later after that big initial moment. And I think a lot of sci-fi we see, and a lot of what I might call like white collar sci-fi, is still kind of enamored by the science and technology at that first level, and isn't so interested in like how that would trickle out 5 or 10 years later. So I was kind of like always interested in what I've started calling like a blue collar sci-fi sensibility, where you actually look at how this would affect people and they're working people, and you don't get carried away with like the people who are benefiting from the technology, or keep the audience at an arm's distance because like your main character knows much more than you do about whatever science and tech is in the film. And you actually allow the audience to come with you on this journey that ultimately explores much more than just science or technology. It's about, the political economy that this all enters into.
Yeah, that's one thing that I thought was brilliant about the film, is that you're not following a scientist or a person who is on the bleeding edge of technology. You're actually, it's like he's actually a Luddite and doesn't want to get the newest technology, and is concerned about it, and like has even concerns about like Wi-Fi and things like that. And I think like that makes it's oddly relatable even for somebody like me who works in technology. Technology is so ubiquitous in like what I do, but in the course of doing that, you meet a lot of people for whom technology is kind of scary and dangerous and like confusing, but who are also forced to use this technology because of the nature in many ways of their work. So you'll see a mini Uber driver who doesn't know how to do much more than use the Uber app, and won't use even another navigation app, because you might have to use this technology even though you're not actually that comfortable with it, just because of the nature of the work that you have. And so that was, I think, a very helpful part. I think the experience of healthcare, that aspect of the movie, I think is kind of, it's easy to forget in some ways because the story in the forest is so compelling. But there's a critique, obviously, of healthcare and the kind of disease that that one of the characters, that Ray, the main character's brother, has, is this kind of weird, you're not really sure what's going on, like, and like I love the idea of chronic fatigue syndrome. In some ways, it's like my wife and I watched it together, and she said, sounds like depression. And I, to me, it was, it's sort of like a very medicalized kind of obvious somebody who just doesn't care. And even one of the characters mentions that. Is that what you were going for? Is that the critique you're trying to make? Or what is it that you're, saying by this, adding this component to the film?
Yeah, I think there are a couple different things going on. One of them, I think the most obvious one would be that these people can't afford a treatment for anything. That's the baseline criticism, of course, that we find a character who's having to, or thinks he has to figure out a way to help his brother out with expensive treatments that he cannot afford. So that's, of course, one aspect of it. But the issue at hand, which you're talking about, the disease is called omnia, and it's an invented disease, but a character later on says that it's related to chronic fatigue syndrome, which is actually a real thing out there. And in no way I'm not saying that people who have chronic fatigue syndrome are inventing it. Mm-hmm. I think that they actually, people who do have chronic fatigue syndrome, and in the movie probably people who have omnia, which is an invented disease, would deal a lot with people who are skeptical that there's anything wrong with them. And there's a certain skepticism of diseases that don't have clear physical manifestations. Right. Certainly, although I think it's changed, it's improving. It's on the upswing. Like depression is sort of like has its own stigmas in people and disbeliefs from people, and any kind of mental issue that people are going through. I think they face an uphill battle with getting people to believe that it's real and not something they can just sort of in a capitalist, like self-improvement world, just sort of improve their way out of by stronger mental techniques. So I wanted to instead, I think what I was really trying to get at with this omnia thing is like a way in which the conditions of the world are creating a malaise among young people, especially young men, who feel completely disconnected from each other and anything around them and any productive way in which they can relate to one another or the world. So there's sort of like, in many ways, I think we're more familiar with this condition, which could be close to a form of depression, but we're more familiar with this in this last year where we have been physically isolated. And I think many of us have probably felt a certain malaise set in at different times of these last 12 months, where omnia all of a sudden, in a scary way, is sort of like a little more pervasive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I think it is something that you can sort of recognize, and obviously the struggle too. I mean, it's the common struggle of in America, in some ways, like uniquely, of having to do additional work or be super concerned with accessing healthcare. The whole instigation to do this work by Ray is the fact that the cost of the care is so outrageous, and he obviously doesn't have access to insurance or anything like that. And then the later on in the movie, the motivation to do a very lucrative route is like the kind of like, now I'll be able to, is the same kind of thing that I think is a very manifest idea in our society, which is like just the one big move to get the big payout, and then everything will be okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
You can finally do that. You can level up in your healthcare and finally get that surgery you've been putting off, or whatever it is. Like healthcare being treated as this like luxury commodity, where you have to like push yourself to earn six figures in order to pay for what should be something provided, as a basic right, is unfortunately, like, in the GoFundMe world we live in with healthcare, is like all too close to home.
Yeah. So, how did you come up with the name Lapsis Beef Tech? Where does that come from?
I honestly, Kevin, I was sitting around in the early stages of writing this, and even before that, I think even when I was just sort of like trying to write a treatment for this, like a rough sketch of it, and that phrase entered my consciousness. And I know that sounds like crazy, but it's really what happened. I don't know. It's a very like abstract thing to just imagine the phrase Lapsis Beef Tech, but somehow, like, listen, I'm sure that some things are in my daily life, made that happen. I couldn't tell you though. It just appeared.
Wow. But it's an interesting, like, the one thing that I was thinking while watching it is the first thing I thought, I kind of had my lawyer hat on and said, the idea of allowing these people to lay cable throughout all these forests, like, there would be no way that conservationists or whatever would allow it. And then I thought to myself, yeah, but if there was enough money to be made, to hell with the environment, which I think is in some ways, like, I'm not sure how explicit you were trying to make that kind of statement, but to me, what it is, it's like the Lapsis Beef Tech is a trail name, which is a very common thing among people who are doing long hikes, on the Appalachian Trail, or like, if you kind of develop a new persona while you're on the trail and you adopt this like trail name. And so I love the idea of sort of twisting that into this, identifier. But also,
not to interrupt you, but that is a good reference, because I hiked the Appalachian Trail, not the whole thing, but I did several sections and came across, and that is definitely the inspiration in the film for trail names. So you're right there. It's like, I remember a guy named who called himself the Riddler, like on the Appalachian Trail, and I was fascinated by these guys. They seem to have like created their own subculture in the woods, away from society, where they had like nicknames for each other.
Yeah, and there is the interesting thing is, like, as you set it up in the movie, there is the same kind of thing, but it's been basically commodified. Yes. And there are like vulture aspects of it. There's a gang of kids at one point who is attempting to, extort Ray and stuff. And because there's, like, as you're talking about, there are all these side effects that we don't normally think about. But, absent parents who let their kids run through the woods to screw over cablers would be this kind of experience. And it's also funny because it's a bunch of kids, but it's interesting taking that whole what is normally this kind of like pristine, like I think Anna at one point asks jokingly to Ray, like, are you much of a hiker?
Right.
Because hiking is this kind of pastime in which you're able to enjoy, like, one of the best things about the United States is just its sort of natural beauty. And the idea that in this story that too becomes just an aspect of this whole commodification and exploitation schema, that the forest is no longer worthy of consuming because it's got to be the place in which cable is laid.
Yes. And listen, you're right. I would hope that there would have been, in the world of Lapsis, there would have been some good lawyers fighting against this. But we have to remember that we do live in our world where many national parks have been sectioned off for oil drilling and for fracking. And that's a reality of our world. So we would never think that could be possible, that fracking could move on to, national parkland, but it has in Utah and certainly in Alaska. So, that unfortunately is a reality. No one would want to hike around a fracked gas well, I can assure you. But they're out there, and they've been partitioned from what was used to be, like in the film in Lapsis, we're talking about the Allegheny State Park which is in upstate New York. That's where it's mentioned a couple times.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, that's where this world is taking place. And yeah, I was really just thinking about in this hyper commodification of even parkland, you could get cabling zones that are sliced off of national parks that is not on private land, so you're not angering but just through like eminent domain, just like oil and gas companies have done. There's just a seizure of land that's then controlled by, these kind of vulture monopoly conglomerates that run this world of cabling. And that's it. It's sort of like the zone in Tarkovsky's movie, The Stalker. It's like, this is just a zone. This is a cabling zone, and that's it. And then you can't think about it anymore as even nature.
Yeah, it is just another commodity. Did you shoot in the Allegheny? Where did you film it?
I filmed in upstate New York, not in Allegheny though, because
That's probably
I think we would have had a lot of difficulty getting permitting to properly shoot there. So we shot it in Putnam County, where we used some state park land, but it was a small park that's relatively unpopular. So we were able to pretty easily get permits. And then we used some private land that abutted the park that we could get access to. And but it pretty much was like a very contained, between the private land and the park land, it was a very contained little area. We didn't move around a lot, and you kind of have to do that if you're trying to like do a low budget film, because it's really moving of people and resources from location to location that really adds up. So we kept it pretty tight, and people stayed at like a local motel and rented some local houses. And it was like 26-day shoot in the summer of 2019.
So you like, what impacts did COVID have on the production of this, right? So if you shot it in 2019, so like, what are the effects that COVID had in terms of the rest of it's obviously being released during a pandemic, meaning people can't, go to screenings necessarily. You're taking advantage of, I guess, streaming and stuff, which is the way a lot of people are consuming it anyway. But I'm curious about the effects that COVID had, just knowing it wouldn't have had as big of an effect on the filming itself, but of other aspects.
Yeah, I mean, that was very lucky that we had the film locked up and done by the end of 2019. And we thought at the end of 2019, going into like January 2020, we had found out that we were going to get to premiere the film in the narrative competition at South by Southwest, which is a big stage for a film like ours, for sure. And it's where we would have an opportunity to like encounter the marketplace and hopefully get a distributor that would get the film out to a wider audience. And then as you know, we entered early March and COVID started to arrive in the US. We weren't sure because some big film festivals had taken place already in 2020, like Sundance and Berlin over in Germany, Berlin Film Festival. Those had gone ahead, but actually what ended up happening was South by Southwest was the first big film festival to cancel. It was like the first big event, if people remember, that canceled in mid-March. And so that was, we were all geared up. All the cast and crew was going to go down there. And that was the first big impact. But, you know, what we did was there was like a fork in the road. A lot of films that were going to be there last year decided to just hold on to their film, I think. And many of them, I think, are still hoping that they'll get that like in-person premiere or in-person theatrical experience. Many then later the year, realizing that this was just going to go on for a year, trickled out. But we decided from the beginning we were going to just make the most of it, of the virtual opportunity that we could get. So we went all year to virtual film festivals, and we found a distributor, Film Movement, a small distributor, but they were able to get us out onto different platforms and crucially get us reviewed in a lot of publications, which just is all you can kind of hope for a small film. And so I think we've been fairly lucky given the circumstances, certainly nothing to complain about, to be able to get the film out even at all in this. I selfishly, you know, as a filmmaker, you kind of die for that first opportunity where you get to watch the film in a room of strangers in a theater. Like that's what a film festival really provides, is that thrill of like hearing people hopefully laugh at your first joke or something. And like we haven't not seen the film in a room with anybody. So it's all been virtual and virtual discussions, virtual Q&As. So that's, you know, that's just, I can't complain. Everyone has had that in one way or the other through the work that they do. So I just feel lucky that the film is out now and that people are able to see it.
One question. Well, so the first thing I'll say is there's one particular scene, and it's like around the 58-minute mark, where Ray and Anna are sitting like on a rock in the forest, and during the scene, the sun comes out. So like the scene starts dark, and then it gets lighter. That's I like. That's one of the coolest and most beautiful shots I've seen in a movie in years. It was so good. I watched that like 3 or 4 different times. Like I shit you not. Like I went back and I was like, they told my wife, I was like, look at this. Like the sun comes out in the scene. Like, like you know, you obviously can't really plan that. It's obviously being shot in the woods, right? And so to me, just like the moment of being able to capture that like on film, just because it's what happens in the woods, and it's cool how like it just changes the kind of nature of the scene. It's in a moment where they're having a conversation that Ray is kind of like becoming aware of the futility of his arguments, and so it's like it was fucking perfect. So like my favorite scene, to be honest with you, that right there, like so good. But one thing I did notice that I wanted to ask you about is there does appear, especially as the person who edited it, there does appear in some scenes a kind of fuzziness, or like I don't like around even this particular on like the edges and stuff like that. Is that, are you intentionally trying to communicate something with that? Like it made it seem like we're talking about walking through the woods towards these like magnetic or whatever like transistors of some, like, you know, they're doing something, I don't know, but like, so the idea that it would almost kind of distort what's going on. Am I seeing something that I'm making more of, or is this intentional, or what?
No, I'm so tickled to hear that you have seen, you know, picked up on that, because it's like it was a little choice that we made going into the film that we made for a reason, and you're onto it. It's like I think it's both that these quantum transistors have and there's this at one point a shot of, you know, be careful. There's like a magnetic field warning sign near them, you know, and so there's a sense that there might be some sort of electromagnetic field around these transistors, which Ray, the character, is, you know, appears to be nervous about in the early parts of the movie too, in general, about sort of just like Wi-Fi and quantum, whatever. But So that knowing that about the character and about the world we were going into, we had a choice going into production about what lenses to use, and we had to decide which lens package to rent for the duration of the film. And one of them offered this kind of like built-in effect, and they're called anamorphic lenses, and they basically distort. They kind of like curve the world a little bit at the edges of the frame, just like you've described. And because they do that, everything kind of gets stretched a little bit, and therefore a little blurry at the edges. And so I loved that, and I thought anything that would help us set this world of Lapsis a little bit in kind of like a weird space, like it's not exactly our world, but it's tweaked a little bit. And that felt like a technical choice we could make that would help us push the film in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely had the kind of effect that you were going for. For me, I mean, it definitely like made it seem like, yeah, there's a little bit something. This isn't a nature documentary where we're filming how beautiful the forest is. There's something like different, and it's in a sort of different place.
Good, yeah. I feel like many TV shows and films I see these days are too sharp, like they're too real, they're too HD, and so like I definitely wanted to avoid that.
Yeah. So the other thing that I love, I mean, the acting in this movie is superb. The characters are, you know, all very like believable. Nobody's sort of over the top and ridiculous. The accent that Ray has kind of makes me laugh because nobody else has that accent at all. But like he just has this. I don't even know where to kind of place it. But it's cool because it sets him kind of apart. But I'm kind of curious. The particularly the characters of Anna and Ray. I'm curious about the origin of these characters. Like, do you have a particular person in mind? Because like Anna to me is an interesting character because it's obviously not a like whatever stereotypical like feminine heroine or something like that. Not really that playing that role. Very much a kind of interlocuting antagonist. And you know, is she modeled after someone that you know? You know, is Ray like where did these characters kind of come from?
I have to admit that I wrote both of the characters for these actors, and much of the nature of the character was just inspired by the actors who played them as a result. So they really became Madeline Wise, who plays Anna, was really like the muse for that type of person.
Okay.
Like and Dean Imperial, who plays Ray, also had been a friend of mine for many years in New York, but is not an actor, and it has mostly been a playwright and working a lot of odd jobs. And we always connect over that. We were always kind of like hustling to try to like do our projects, but doing a lot of weird jobs in the run of play. And so like he and I, you know, had this friendship, and I just had a feeling like he had this inside of him to be like the leading man of a film. And I always felt like he kind of almost had like a James Gandolfini ethos to him, and also just always felt to me like he was from a different time period. He wasn't like he didn't feel contemporary, and I was really intrigued by that.
The 70s mobster, yeah.
Oh yeah, so that's just like Dean. Really, he dresses like that too. It's really who he is. But of course, you have to like layer some character building on top of that. You can't just do a documentary about your friends and call it a movie. So we built, you know, I definitely built character on top of what was already like a really rich base that were given to me by these real people that I know. So, and Madeline's a fantastic actor. She was in this HBO show, Crashing. She played, she was one of the leads, playing the main character's girlfriend in the second season, I believe. And anyway, I just think she's great. I think she should be in more things. And same with Dean. I hope he's cast in more things. I think they're both great actors, and they really just brought so much of themselves. Like Madeline would never be up for playing the classic, you know, heroine of a film like that. I knew that. So I was writing a character for what I knew Madeline would want this character to be, kind of. And I think that's when you really feel like someone is a muse. You feel like you're writing through a lens of someone else that's out of your own head, you know.
And were you like especially to me, the character Anna, right, is somebody for whom I recognize being somebody who's like on the left, having a critique, but who also like isn't somebody who just wants to escape and like live in a camper in like state parks, but like needs to work and
Right.
has a job while still remaining, sort of critical of the system in which I'm actually working. Because there was like one quick comment. I was just like, she's got this critique of cabling, yet she's 5 years into doing it. So it's like, like it's like, but it is that standard kind of like the gig workers don't have to do this. They're choosing to do this. Right? They could do something else, but obviously like the opportunities are not there for her. And so I'm wondering, are these like your politics? Are they Madeline's? Are they a combination? Like whose politics are being voiced through Anna?
Well, I would say that I definitely wrote all the dialogue and the whole script before giving it to either Dean or Madeline. So that I think that'll answer your question about whose politics it is. But I definitely I think that Madeline is very aligned with, and I knew that going in because I knew her as a friend. Going into handing this character and asking her if she would be a part of the project. So I would say that for me then, like I have grown up feeling these two characters and their respective positions inside of me at different times in my life, and I only kind of like became more politically aware through my 20s. And I think I started out much more like Ray in this film, someone who believes in sort of just like the meritocracy and personal, freedom. And you just sort of like pick yourself up by your bootstraps and you work as hard as everyone else. And, we're all sort of starting out from the same, start line or whatever. So all that like cliche stuff. And then I think I probably over my 20s started to become more like the Anna character, where I'm still working within the system, but I have my critique.
Yeah, it is funny because the writing is a way in which you can they're believable, and this is a conversation that I've had with people, right, in terms of like the arguing for the meritocracy. And my favorite was that because like I obviously can't help but put a Marxist perspective on the movie. Sure. And so like if you want these quick, like what is an example of false consciousness in Marxism, right? The example of like a person who's a working person who adopts the ideology of a proletariat who adopts the ideology of a bourgeois person. Well, that's Ray, right? Because he even says, if I was the owner, of course I'd make these robots. Of course I'd do this kind of thing. And I'd make a killing. And it's like, yeah, exactly. But you're out here because you can't even afford 10 grand for your brother's, like treatment. It's like, exactly. There's so many examples, I think, of like, again, the sort of self-aware worker in a Marxist, like who is a worker who represents having sort of class consciousness. Well, it's right. Anna, and then you do realize that it's like a number of other people that Ray meets along the way are also like conscious workers. And yes. I love like there's a quick little shot where the woman that runs one of the stands at the campsite has an anti robot. Yeah, she kind of flips it down quick, right? As the corporate people are around. Like, so it's great that there's these examples of like a sort of a workforce who is self-recognizing, and then yes. As you see in the course of the movie, when you have that self-recognition, it's much easier to organize. Because there was a quip I made. It was like Anna says at one point, like the organizing's done, all we need is the spark. And I was like, oh, fuck, that makes it a lot easier, right? Because that's like the hardest part. So like, oh, that seems like a little cheap. But the thing is, like, you're getting all of these hints along the way, not just through Anna, but other characters, that there is this self-awareness. There is this like intelligence among the group of people, both like what they're doing, how they're doing, the Anna's scheme and how to capture the robot and stuff like that, right? This like not only aware, like I've always said, education is designed to make people smart enough to run machines, but not smart enough to know they need to break them. Well, this workforce is one that has, through yes. the course of many years of doing it, educated themselves into how to break their machines, you know. And I think so there's all these and obviously, I mean, it's at its core a movie about the power of organizing, you know, together. And I think it's a movie that, from the Marxist perspective at least, is one in which a worker that is very much in a self or a false consciousness kind of way, who's totally alienated, who is in it for themselves, and who gets into it through fraud, recognizes in the course of doing it that they are aligned with other workers, that they have this sort of interest, and is, in the course of being essentially hyper exploited, brought together with their fellow workers. And so, like, obviously one can have a sort of Marxist perspective on any movie, and then you have to look at the class dynamics of everyone. And but the cool thing about this movie is that that's part of the whole milieu. That's what the kind of story is struggling with, is this like major class difference. And you have, you know, I like the fact too that the corporate people are not, they're not like super scary, and you don't see them in scenes in which they're not really doing anything nefarious except for looking out for their interests, you know. And so they're not like, it's not like, ooh, these are evil people. That's like, they're just like corporate CEOs, like doing what they do. And so it like that's, I guess, just my, like, I'm, you know, I don't know how much of that kind of stuff you're doing is self-conscious, but it's obviously it's from somebody who's, you know, pretty deep in this stuff, very easy to recognize, and provides a very entertaining way of presenting a lot of the ideas that if you read them from Karl Marx, you're going to fall asleep and get bored, you know. And so I don't know, I guess, like, I don't know how much of, I don't know, you know, if you would consider yourself a Marxist and intentionally trying to communicate this stuff, or if this is stuff you'd recognize from a Marxist perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think essentially, like, in what I've read and what I've seized on and what has been influential to me, I can't profess to have read all of Marx directly, but I feel like the people I do read are so influenced by Marx that surely it trickled down into me, and you could consider me a Marxist, I'm sure. But I mean, people like David Graeber's book, Utopia of Rules, and then, you know, Bullshit Jobs, like those were super influential to my conception of like labor in this world of this movie. You know, I think like something else interesting about this whole process is that, like, I tried for a while to raise money for this movie in the traditional way. You try, like, as a first-time filmmaker, you send your script to people who fund movies, and I tried, and I had various, I used what connections I had to those kinds of people to get the script to them and give them my best, you know, pitch or whatever. And I ran into a lot, and I think it dovetails with what you're saying. I ran into a lot of, like, you know, I just don't understand our hero Ray, you know, so Ray's our hero, right? You'd say he's our hero, like, yeah. Well, like, I feel like we lose him. Like, where does he end up? Like, he just sort of recedes from the story, and he kind of gives up what little agency he has. And I would be like, yeah, I totally, like, yeah. Right. And that's exactly, I mean, you're right. And I can already hear that you're not going to give me any money to make the movie, but like that is, you know, it's, I will say, and, you know, not trying to like pat the film on the back or whatever, but it definitely was my intention to do something I don't see a lot. I don't see it done a lot, which is to have the individual recede into the collective and join in solidarity with others for a greater struggle. And like, that's just not, you just don't see a lot of that in movies. And you get a lot of meritocratic, like, hero-based narratives where it's like, this person, we were waiting for this person, and they like solved the problem, and they conquered the thing. And I was just interested in telling a story where someone has a piece of the puzzle that could be helpful, but starts with a lot of privilege, like myself in many ways in life, and sees what they could offer, has their mind convinced by people who have been doing the work. And I think you rightly pick up on the fact that, like, I get away with, in the context of a feature film, with having the work having been done already in the background. That could be a whole other film about the organizing, right? And but hopefully peppering enough details of that where you sense what that is, and then have our hero do offer the piece, but then sort of step into the whole, and that's where we kind of leave him. And as a result, I've also got a lot of criticism of the ending of the film, which we can talk about too if you want, but I don't know, maybe we should avoid spoilers. But it's also just following on this idea of like, well, what happens to our, I think there's a way to model collective action in a heroic frame, and I think that's what I'm trying to do in this movie.
Yeah, that is interesting. Like, without giving a lot away too, there was a sense for me. I mean, I remember getting to like the hour and like 30-minute mark, and like one being engrossed in the film, where like I thought maybe I was like an hour in, but then I see there's like, oh shit, there's only like 10 minutes left of this movie. Like, how like, I know storytelling, right? We got to get to like the resolution of this shit like fast. Like are we at the climax, right? Like, I wasn't sure. And then like very quickly you think like, yeah, okay, like there is this kind of moment of exuberance. You're like, okay, like this is for me, there was the, oh fuck, I hope it's not the sorry to bother you moment where like it takes a shift and then like in the last minute just kind of puts a bow on it in some like bullshit way. I was really afraid of that. And the cool thing is like what actually happens is you kind of lean in and you're like, wait, so what? And I like that. They're like, my wife and I had a different reaction. She was like, it didn't feel like it ended. And I was like, I kind of think it's not supposed to, like, you're not supposed to get a nice, like, this is a compliment too. Like, I hate the Huckleberry Finn ending, right? Like, oh fuck, I'm sick of writing this book. I've got 10 more pages. Let's just like tie up every bow. Like, you don't know what happens to the characters and how this all shakes out. You don't get this long tail resolution, right? So there's one question I wanted to ask on that. But you already kind of, there could be a whole other movie about the organizing. Yes, there could also be a whole other movie that takes it from where you leave off. Is there any plans? I mean, obviously the thing just came out, right? So you don't know how commercially successful for, but like there's a feeling for me that you have done such a good job at creating a believable universe, not too far kind of in the distance, with this added technology that could have, that is already like shown in news clips and stuff in the movie, that like it's had this major effect, at least in Wall Street. There is an interesting universe you've created. Do you have this idea to do something else with it, or is it kind of going to stand on its own with this single feature film?
It's funny you should ask, because I'm actually working right now. I don't know if it'll go anywhere, but I'm working on building out an idea for an episodic TV show based in this world that wouldn't continue necessarily. I mean, I don't know yet, but right now, though, my thinking is it wouldn't continue like picking up from where we left off, but it would start a little bit before and treat the film kind of like a Rashomon effect, where the action of the film happens across a season of the show, but action, we're following other characters. So, and we might even get some of the characters of Lapsis coming in and out of our story.
Right, you got to get Felix in there to get more of that stuff, because you got to like, because there's some nefarious shit there, but like you only get a taste. And
I know. Listen, I hope I would be lucky if I can get someone to want to make that, but it would be such a thrill to be able to explore these characters more, because part of like building the world was a lot of work of thinking like, well, what is this person doing? What is their gig? How is it a scam? What's their daily life like? Myself and the producers, we did tons of discussions of that just to get the answer to one detail. Like, wait a second, so how do the robots get a new cable bundle? Okay, we got to think about how like the resupply system works, and that takes us into like an exploration of details that never make it into the movie.
Or it's like a 10-second, like the little robot goes into a box, like, yeah, right. Okay, like, yeah, but it's amazing. You have to do like, okay, this whole idea that takes this major conversation is 10 seconds in the movie, but that 10 seconds, really matters.
Exactly. So to be able to take a lot of those, the conversations we had and stuff we haven't even thought of yet and build it out would be a dream. I don't know, it's hard to get anything made when, it's a small film. It didn't have any stars in it. We'll see if anyone's interested, but I'm gonna work on that proposal, and I hope to do exactly what you were asking about.
Well, that's awesome, and I mean, I will obviously do my best to promote it to whatever audience I have, and say it right here, like, go see this movie. It's a fantastic film. The how much, like, you also scored the film, so you're like a musician as well.
Yeah, I do. I had scored my documentaries, and it's just something that I kind of like taught myself how to do. I don't like know any music theory really. I can't read or write music, but I do it all by ear, and I use a keyboard and I use software instruments, and I just have sort of developed my way of doing it over the years, starting with all the doc work, and then when we got to making, this film, I had a pretty clear idea of what I wanted. And it's helpful to be able to be scrappy and do a few things yourself while also collaborating in key positions, for sure. But that was one thing I thought I could bite off, and being able to do the score and do the editing was very symbiotic, because I could kind of go write music, I could come back to the film, see if it worked, and I wouldn't have to email back and forth with someone else who was trying to save money and get the film out and everything. It's like, definitely, if you can do that, it was fun for me to do, and so I did it.
Yeah, you avoiding the copyrights, but that is a very gig worker kind of mentality too, right? Like, right, like, I gotta, if can I do it myself? Yeah, I guess I'll do it myself. I think that's that's a pull yourself up by the bootstraps in a very different way, and I think in a way that's better. But all right, like, again, anyone watching this, go see this movie. It's really fantastic. Noah, I have enjoyed talking with you about it. I wish you the best of luck. Hopefully you have the opportunity to explore this world, because I think it's the cool thing about it, and the thing that's really awesome, is that it's our world. It's a world that everyone recognizes. It doesn't have horse people. Right? It's something we can really connect with, and I think it allows you to tell the story that everyone kind of knows, and in a way that's both entertaining and beautiful, and just I mean, it's a piece of art. And so I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I will do my absolute best to promote it, and I wish you the best of luck, man.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I really appreciate you watching it and taking the time, and I hope people enjoy it. And thanks for having me on.
For sure, man. All right, cool.
All right.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Sensible Socialist podcast. This podcast is supported by listeners like you, and no advertisements or anything will ever be said. If you want to support the podcast, please go to patreon.com/sensiblesocialist and give today. Also, please give us a review or a rating on iTunes or wherever you listen to the podcast, as it greatly helps. All right. See you next time.